Reports from committees. Prime Minister's questions.
Member for Barataria Sanwan.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 1, could the Prime Minister indicate whether any medical personnel and/or the Minister of Health were present when discussions were taking place on the COVID-19 pandemic between the Venezuelan Vice President and himself during her recent visit to Trinidad?
Madam Speaker, the context of a conversation between the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago and the Vice President of Venezuela with any connection to COVID had to do with its national security implications. And as such, Madam Speaker, the relevant officers who were required for such a conversation, the Minister of National Security and Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, was present, as well as the Minister of Foreign Affairs. The discussion had nothing to do with the biological nature of the virus or its management in such a way. But most importantly, Trinidad and Tobago, being 7 miles away from Venezuela, a country of 30 million people at the moment, or thereabouts, who could supply us with an unending flood of refugees, many of whom might be carrying the virus, because we had no idea what was going on in Venezuela as their response. And given the fact that we in Trinidad and Tobago, from our own national security concerns, require to keep our borders closed and to ensure that Venezuela does not pose a threat to us. The context of COVID between Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela is a national security issue that did not require medical doctors.
Minister, are you then saying that the discussion that was communicated to you prior to the visit was on refugees and not COVID-19?
I am not hearing you, so if you would like to speak a little clearer, I'll try to answer your question. What did you say?
Can you elaborate then? Was it communicated to you prior to the visit whether the communication was on refugees rather than on COVID-19 discussions?
I had made no statement about refugees. I talked about Venezuelans coming to Trinidad and Tobago. And Madam Speaker, Mrs. Rodriguez was appointed head of the national COVID response in Venezuela on the 27th of February. A few days later, she asked for a courtesy call on the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. That visit took place on the 26th of March. And Madam Speaker, we have said, both myself and other officers of the Cabinet, I'm clear that we had said that there was no prearranged agenda. It was a courtesy call in the context of our response to the COVID emergency. So if you want to quote what I've said, we've said that publicly on numerous occasions. So I'm not here talking about it being a prior arrangement of refugees. So if you're going to quote what I've said, please quote that. A courtesy call in the context of our COVID emergencies and our concern in Trinidad and Tobago about the threat that Venezuela posed to us.
Supplemental member for Oropouche East.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister, in relation to the visit dealing with national security in the context of COVID pandemic, did the Prime Minister's office or yourself consider having in attendance the Chief of Defense Staff and the Commissioner of Police for discussions of this nature?
No, we did not, because two members of the National, in fact, the 3 members who they met with were members of the National Security Council.
Supplemental member for Caroni East.
So, from media reports, the The Vice President had requested to come, but she postponed because she had, or you all postponed together, whether she had flu-like symptoms. Did you think that there was any necessity for testing or anything or similar before she came here?
I am not responsible for the medical condition of the President of Venezuela. A request was made in early March, and the visit was made on the 26th of March. And as far as I was aware, that the President, I am not the doctor for the President of Venezuela or the Vice President.
And this next question. Next question. Member for Oropouche East, supplemental.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister, was the government of Trinidad and Tobago concerned that the government had accepted at that time a visit by the Vice President of Venezuela 24 hours after colleagues, officials, including the President of Venezuela, were indicted in the United States on drug trafficking, narco trafficking, and corruption charges?
Prime Minister.
No, we had no concern like that.
Member for Barataria-Sanon, and might I just remind members if they need to speak without the mask on both sides there are mics.
Prime Minister, could the Prime Minister explain how the decision to keep small and medium businesses and enterprises closed while allowing fast food establishments and conglomerates to open until 8 p.m. daily is helping to decrease the spread of the coronavirus?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, the decision to open or to leave closed certain businesses was a management of numbers of people and movement of people in response to the knowledge of how the virus is spread. Food establishments and restaurants were to open in phase 1, and they include all categories of small, medium, and large food establishments. Also, food establishments were chosen in phase 1 because food establishments and the employees there have long been required to be licensed in keeping with the Public Health Ordinance, and therefore the Public Health Inspectorate and both the health and local government have oversight of these establishments and have been enforcing food safety and infectious disease guidelines for many years, and as such, we're the best place to continue the enforcement measures relating to food service.
Member for Barataria-Sanon.
Prime Minister, based on the data by the Ministry of Health, where no new COVID cases have been found and no new deaths, why is it then necessary to with the small and medium enterprises hurting with economic damage, why not are you not giving them a chance at survival as you're given to the others in phase 1?
Prime Minister.
Because, Madam Speaker, as we expose ourselves in a reopening after the stay home or during the stay home, we are dealing with this matter in the context of the nature and the quantum of the risk involved. And it is a management of numbers. So we open up and allow some more people out as long as the results are good, and we have made it quite clear that we have looked at this thing very clearly. We've laid down a number of phases as we'll bring more and more people out. And I was at pains to point out, Madam Speaker, this approach is one in which one is measuring the risk as you go forward, exposing more and more people. And based on the results of the national testing program, we will determine how fast we go with this or how slowly we go. That was all made very clear, Madam Speaker. It's all a question about management of numbers and exposure of the population to a risk that we are aware of.
Supplemental member for Barataria-Sanon.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Prime Minister, if it's a management by numbers, then why did you shorten the amount of time for the businesses to be opened because of the volume, and it will increase the bunching of numbers based on the decreased timeline per unit volume of patrons entering the establishment. So it cannot be a problem with numbers because the numbers are increasing with a shorter time.
Member, it's a question,
Sorry.
not a statement. Okay, I would not allow that as a supplemental question. Member for Guyanese.
Honorable Prime Minister, based on international standards and a comparative analysis, are you satisfied that the amount of testing done in Trinidad will give you, the decision makers, enough information as to continue to make your decisions in terms of opening different areas? Are you satisfied with that? Or do you think there's need for more?
Madam Speaker, I don't know what international standard the member is referring to, because the last time he gave me international standards, it was based on treatment by hydroxychloroquine. But I know of no international standard. All countries are learning as we go on this matter. And depending on the situation in the country, the testing program is tailored to suit that. Madam Speaker, we have organized our business in such a way that as we test now, we are satisfied and we are confident that our testing program is suitable for the situation in Trinidad and Tobago as we go forward in our condition as against other people's condition.
Supplemental, member for Carries.
Bearing in mind your answer about you don't know about the international standards, the United States is testing 3% and Trinidad is 0.07%. How do you feel as a leader of the country with that small amount of testing?
Madam Speaker, as I've said before, Trinidad and Tobago, the government of Trinidad and Tobago takes its guidelines from the public health experts in Trinidad and Tobago who have distinguished themselves in giving their government expert, successful advice, and we are grateful for that. We are not comparing ourselves with the United States, who have taken a completely different approach and is getting a completely different result. So, Madam Speaker, the US is no example for us.
Member for Point of Peer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister. Given the statement by the Minister of Finance that the Office of the Prime Minister has spent $10 million on COVID-19 relief, could the Prime Minister please specify what this $10 million was spent on?
Prime Minister.
Excuse me, Madam Speaker, I'm just trying to find, oh yes. No, that's not the answer. Sorry about that, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance, in his statement to the House of Representatives on April 27, 2020, indicated that $10 million per month for 3 months, May, June, and July, will be given to religious bodies in proportion to the size of their congregations for them to distribute food to the poor and needy in accordance with their existing procedures and programs. The Office of the Prime Minister, which has the portfolio of ecclesiastical affairs, has the responsibility to make these payments within the shortest possible time, and Madam Speaker, we have been doing so, and we'll monitor and evaluate the progress of payments to ensure transparency and accountability by these agencies. These allocations are being made to the umbrella religious groups as far as possible. Thus far, a sum of $9.46 million has been paid to 62 umbrella religious organizations, and that is being used, Madam Speaker, to provide food support for the poor and the needy of all these communities.
Member for Point of Peer.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Honourable Prime Minister. Given the recent statements by the Minister of National Security that Paria Fuel Trading Company has a clause in its contract preventing its buyers from reselling its fuel to countries sanctioned by the United States, could the Prime Minister specifically state whether this clause was included in the contract concerning the sale of 150,000 barrels of gasoline involving ES Euro Shipping SA?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, the contract was amended and it determined that the fuel going to Aruba, which was initially intended to go to St. Eustatius, that contract of the fuel going to Aruba as the final destination had a clause addressing trade sanctions which applied. Trade sanctions form part of the contract to the fuel that was designated to go to Aruba.
Member for Point of View.
Prime Minister, based on what you just said that the contract was amended, could you also state what penalties would be in place taken by Pariah Fuel Trading if the purchaser of that fuel breached that clause?
I will allow that. That is a supposition based on how you formulated that question. Member for Point of View.
Could the Prime Minister state what would be the penalty in breaching that clause?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, it's a commercial contract with contractual terms, and if it would indicate that there are liabilities of one kind or another if you breach a contract between parties, the information of which available is as that. It's a commercial contract which had liabilities if it is breached. The nature of the liabilities I could not disclose at this time.
Point of View.
Madam Speaker, Prime Minister, what would be those types of liabilities that you just described if you breach a contract?
I'm not hearing you.
Sorry, Madam Speaker. Based on your answer, what would be the liabilities based on breaching the contract that you just described?
I just said, to the best of my ability to answer you, it's a commercial contract which the term would incur liability. The nature of the liability is not available to me. These commercial contracts are usually carrying whatever terms and conditions. Those terms are not made public. They usually have confidentiality clause and other things. So what I do know is that there was a clause with a requirement on the part of the buyer to observe international trade sanctions.
Member for Point of View.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Prime Minister, could you state if any of this clause that you just described, this sanction clause, has been in place prior to any other contracts by Pariah Fuel other than this contract?
I am not familiar with the other contracts or the day-to-day arrangements of contracts, but if the member would like to pose that question with notice, you can have an answer.
Member for Point of View. Question number 5.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Prime Minister, based on recent reports that the Pariah Fuel Trading Company sold 150,000 barrels of fuel to ES Euro Shipping SA via a spot purchase request on March 28, 2020, could the Prime Minister state the total payment received by Pariah Fuel Trading, as well as the price per barrel which the fuel was sold at for this spot sale?
Madam Speaker, Pariah Fuel Trading Limited sold approximately 150,000 barrels of MoGas with final destination to Aruba. The cargo was sold on U.S. Gulf Coast reference prices, which is the same basis on which the cargo was purchased from its supplier. The exact price cannot be disclosed due to contractual confidentiality, which is standard practice in commercial trading. Our companies are engaged in commercial trading, and trade secrets are valuable to the people of Trinidad and Tobago and will not now be disclosed.
Supplemental, Member for Puchis.
Thank you very much. Prime Minister, with regard to the sale of the fuel in the context in which you described it, and given the contractual arrangements for this sale, are you prepared today to instruct the Attorney General to undertake an investigation as to whether or not this contract has been breached by way of reselling to an embargoed country?
I will not allow that as a supplemental question based on the question or the answer to question 5. Member for Point of View.
Prime Minister, based on your response to my question, could you state then that how that payment was made, either by cash, wire transfer, or check? the barrier fuel trading.
Madam Speaker, if the member wishes that kind of detail, he can file it with the appropriate notice, and that information can be sourced for his benefit.
Member for Caroni East.
Honourable Prime Minister, would you indicate how the government is treating with nationals abroad who sought life-saving cancer treatment and surgical procedures and are now seeking urgent national security exemptions for their return home?
Madam Speaker, when the government took the decision as part of the response of the people of Trinidad and Tobago in protecting ourselves from the virus in a pandemic, the decision to close the border was a major decision, Madam Speaker, with serious, far-reaching consequences. And as a result of having taken that decision, we understand, Madam Speaker, that there are people on both sides of that border, but the border needs to remain closed so as to protect the 1.3 million people in Trinidad and Tobago. Having said that, Madam Speaker, we did indicate that on a case-by-case basis, we will consider applications for exemptions, and this is in that context that all exemptions are being considered, and as far as we are able to grant those exemptions without compromising our border closure, that will continue while the border is closed.
Supplemental, member for Caroni East.
Honourable Prime Minister, would you happen to have any ideas to the number of citizens abroad who went for treatment, have applied for exemption to come back home? I know it's a difficult question, but if you have any answer.
Well, I don't have a number in front of me, but if you file that question to the relevant minister, you can get an answer. But what I did say in talking to the people of Trinidad and Tobago, both home and abroad, that we are aware that there are 330,000 people outside of Trinidad and Tobago who carry our passports or who claim Trinidad and Tobago as home. But in managing the safety and the life of the people of Trinidad and Tobago within Trinidad and Tobago, the closure of the border was a predicate. And therefore, we will manage exemptions on a case-by-case basis without unnecessarily exposing the population in Trinidad and Tobago.
Supplemental, member for Caroni East.
Would you consider giving special consideration to patients who need to continue their cancer management in Trinidad, and without which they stand the risk of passing away? If those things come to you, would you give active consideration?
Madam Speaker, they don't come to me. This is managed by the Ministry of National Security on a case-by-case basis. And I expect that the decision would be made on a case-by-case basis, and I would have seen, Madam Speaker, the results of that. To make another offer is to offer to compromise the border closure of Trinidad and Tobago, and that I am not prepared to do at this time.
Member for Couva North.
Madam Speaker, question number 7 to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister state who are the contractors providing the cloth face mask at a total cost of $5 million and the cost of each mask?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, that matter is being handled by the Ministry of Finance with NIPDEC as the agent, which is currently evaluating the tender process, the tender offerings, and such answers would be available when that is complete. The tender price and, of course, the awardees and the total cost, or the cost per tender. Different tenderers offer different prices, and we have to wait and see what NIPDEC has done with that.
Member for Couva North, may I invite you to use the podium?
Madam Speaker, Prime Minister, are you aware that your Minister of Health previously stated at a press conference that the masks to be distributed by Field and others were at no cost to the state?
The Minister was speaking about a separate body of masks, a particular group of masks, which was going to Field at that time, which was donated by citizens. The reference to no cost was specific to that
Supplemental.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Prime Minister, how soon before the masks are made available to the public?
As soon as the contracts are awarded and the tenderers are able to provide them, we expect that they will be in a few days' time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Prime Minister, since we are already in the phases of reopening, is there a specific time period? Is there a move with haste to get these masks available to the population?
Prime Minister.
We are moving with haste, but I mean, as you're the same person who would be asking about transparency and procurement process and so on. So those things eat into the time. And the tender process had taken up some time. The award process is there. So that's a balancing act. We're trying to move as fast as we could, but we're also trying to comply with the requirement for accounting for the public expenditure.
Member for Couva South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Could the Prime Minister inform this House as to the total number of applicants who have received their salary relief, self-employed, and rental grants respectively as at the 14th of May, 2020?
Madam Speaker, as of today, or as of the date mentioned, which is the 14th of May, the Ministry of Finance advised that 12,162 persons have received salary relief grants. That was as of May 14th, and the cost of those grants to the taxpayer is $16,770,000.
Supplemental.
Prime Minister, could you provide the data with respect to the self-employed and the rental grants, which was part of the question?
If the member would file that with the appropriate notice, we'll be able to get it from the relevant ministries.
1 minute. One minute, please. Member for Urupuch East, you're quite seasoned. Please don't disturb the proceedings. Member for Couva South.
Madam Speaker, whilst I'm not satisfied with the answer of the Prime Minister, could the Prime Minister tell us why the commitment of his government to deliver 10,000 new grants per week, which was stated by the Minister of Finance on the 27th of April 2020, has not been followed through?
Madam Speaker, the handing out of public money to the public requires a certain amount of care and attention, and that is by its very nature a slow process. If one is to ensure that these grants go to the deserving and the deserving only, it is turning out to be a slower process than we anticipated to ensure that those monies go only to the people for whom the qualification applies.
Tell member for Couva South.
Speaker, I'm still to get from the Prime Minister the number of applicants who have received their self-employed and rental grants.
I believe that question was asked and answered. Supplemental, member for Urupuch East.
Thank you very much. Madam Speaker, just for absolute clarity, I did not hear the answer of the Prime Minister with relation to self-employed and rental grant. He did not give a figure. Could I ask the Prime Minister if he has the figure to give us? Thank you.
I believe that we have all been in this chamber. That question was posed twice. A third time just now by member for Urupuch, for Couva South. I believe the response I heard on the second occasion was that I don't have that information, but if the information is posed on proper notice, I believe that's what I heard as an answer. So the question has been asked 3 times. I'm certain it was answered once.
Okay, could I ask another question? Yes. Prime Minister, in light of recent statements by the Minister of Social Development concerning challenges with payment of rental grants, has the government overcome some, if not all, of those challenges being posed by persons who may not be acting properly and so on, in terms of the process to get the rental grants?
Minister.
It is not a situation where you, at a particular point in time on a particular date, you overcommit. It's an ongoing requirement to observe and prevent such defalcations from occurring. So once you are engaged in delivering those kinds of services, you have to be engaged on an application-by-application process.
Honourable members, the time for Prime Minister's questions is now spent.